Hi, my name is Richard. I'm 22. I study philosophy. It's one of my main interests. My other interests include drumming, chickens. I keep 2 little chickens at my house, gardening, and that's about it. I love philosophy because you can ask questions about things that you just never would have even thought to have asked in the first place. Like, just last year I was doing about, do numbers exist? And if they do exist, like, how do they exist? Do they exist like this stage? Like, this stage could have been blue, or it could have been smaller, it could have been bigger, but like, could one have existed differently in the same way? These are all easy questions to ask, but they're very hard to answer. And philosophy is a very rigorous process, and my dyslexia has made that very much harder. And I'm going to talk to you about my process with dyslexia and how I've overcome that. So it's caused struggle throughout my life. It was mostly firstly at school. I'd constantly daydream. I would really struggle to learn to read and write. You just get like shouted at by teachers all the time because you'd say, you know, oh yeah, I don't understand. When in reality, I'd be like just daydreaming for like half the lesson. I had a dyslexia assessment the other year, and it went really in depth, and it was essentially, it was able to really break apart all the components of my sort of how my brain works. And he concluded that while I have very good verbal reasoning skills, I've got terrible processing skills, like of large amounts of information. So he said never to become an air traffic controller. And he also said I've got pretty bad spelling, stuff like that. So this sort of very polarized sort of way that my mind works meant that I was quite good at some things in school, but terrible in others. This is very well reflected in my music GCSE, which I got a C overall, which I was very proud of. But the breakdown of it was an A star, 2 Ds, and a U. So it was, again, very polarized. And I'd sort of have to stick to those strengths to just get through school and get the grades I needed to then play to my strengths at A-level. So that's what I did when I started doing A-level. I picked the subjects that I was good at and I enjoyed. So one of those was philosophy. And I didn't know it at the time, but I'd imagine it was because of my good verbal reasoning skills that I was good at that and that I also enjoyed it. So my dyslexia affects me in other ways. It also can affect me socially. So when I was working in retail, I'd say be looking for a specific manager. I'd go into the office, and before I'd go in, I'd think there could be anywhere from 0 to 5 managers in there of any combination, and the manager I'm looking for might not be in there, and they might be in there. I'd open the door. They'd all say some variation of hi, oh, hi, Richard, how are you? All right, all right. And I had about like 2 seconds to take this all in, bearing in mind there's a difference as well between all right and all right, one of which requires an answer, which is I am all right, and the other one just requires all right back. And then I'd like just be in the room and like staring at them, and I'd take this all in, and then, you know, if there was 5 in there, I'd give an answer back to half of them awkwardly, and the other I'd sort of ignore. And then there could just be no one in there, and I've just sort of like been staring at this room for like 2 seconds, and I'd be picked up on CCTV, very weirdly. That leads me on to another thing. I've got terrible observational skills, like visual observation. I can like just walk into a room full of people, and if I'm looking for a specific person, I just cannot pick them out, even though I've got perfectly good vision. Or if I'm meeting someone up in public, I'll often just stare right at the person while looking for them and just not pick them up, and they'll like say hi to me, and I just don't pick that up. But that's sort of more of a trivial thing. Socially, I've attempted to overcome this in 2 ways. The first one was just through sheer exposure in retail. This one actually helped. It just helped me overcome that like easing into conversation, which I always found the hardest bit. Once you've got the flow going, it's actually quite easy. The other one was I'd sort of have a mental script in my head, and this sort of worked in retail for like, you know, the everyday, day-to-day stuff. Like, you know, if you're selling something, you know, then you'd know all the common things you'd talk about with that. But when I'd apply it to real life, it didn't work so well. For example, how I always say that I'm good because I generally am always good. You know, a few days are bad days for me. But I think because I always say the same words, people always don't take that sincerely, and they think I'm just, saying, oh, I'm good, So I'd say that is probably not the best way to do it. So yeah, when I was about 7, my parents sent me to a special needs school, which it just took the pressure off school because they just didn't shout at you for every little thing you couldn't do. So my handwriting was terrible because I have hypermobility, which is just this whole other can of worms. Yeah, they just see it as, oh, well, you can improve. It was about self-improvement over the long run. And as well with the writing, sort of funnily enough, none of us really write anymore, we all type. But yeah, now I'm old enough and my writing is a lot better. I can either write good and slow or fast and not good. But yes, then I moved back into mainstream school because the other one only had 15 students in and it closed down. Yeah, and I'd constantly daydream in school. I don't think there was a single lesson I went through where I didn't daydream at least once. And if it was a non-essential part, I could sort of work out what was said. And if it was an essential part, I'd strategically use my I don't understands or I couldn't hear what you were saying. And then often they'd explain the concept again, and they'd be starting to draw out diagrams on the board, and I'd be thinking, all right, I've really got to focus. Because last time this happened, I started daydreaming again. And then, I was thinking about when I was daydreaming, and then, if I don't do this, it's going to be really embarrassing. And then the teacher would be looking at me saying, oh, do you understand now? And I wouldn't, because I was daydreaming. So I pretty much stopped daydreaming every lesson when I had this one particular teacher in Year 9 biology. And his teaching style was very good. It was very visual, very clear. And the topics were already interesting to me in the first place. So it was just the perfect storm of, a good place for me to learn. And I just went this whole lesson once without daydreaming. And I remember thinking, this is what most people must be like throughout school. And I applied what I learned from my favorite subject, biology at the time, to then all my other subjects. And I'd go back for extra revision at lunchtimes, and my teacher was very accommodating for that. And I could then apply that. Once I understood one subject, I could apply it to everything else. And that's how I managed to get through school, not just through using my strategic I don't understands. My daydreaming also has its benefits. Sometimes, or I can't induce it, but sometimes I daydream about the very thing I'm doing. So if I'm writing an essay, I really get into it, and people could say my name. I once had a class, I was writing an essay, a practice essay in a room, and this class came in, and I didn't really notice that they were there until I looked around. And it just really helps, and it doesn't just apply to essays, but it also applies to, I remember when I was working in retail, there was the chilled section, and I just get really into it, and it was less so there because the customers were also there that I'd have to interact with. They'd say my name and I wouldn't, obviously I'd hear that and I'd snap out of it. But it's not something I can induce, so I just ride the wave when I get it, but it can also have its benefits. And it's not my only strategy as well, because normally essay writing periods are just long periods of procrastination and sort of not getting much done. But, and even if I do manage to get work done, and I don't procrastinate, it's work not to procrastinate for me. And one of the main strategies I've had to stop this is I try to set the tone for the day, where instead of getting up and maybe watching half an hour of TV, I get up, I think about work, and it just sets the tone for the day. I start working immediately, and then after 3 hours, 4 hours, I go do what I want. And it sort of leaves the work pure, and I can then relax afterwards and it doesn't taint it. I was then diagnosed with cancer. I found a single lump and I had no other symptoms, so I went for a biopsy, which was horrible. They then did a scan and found several lumps inside my body, all in one area, which was here. It was Hodgkin's lymphoma, so it had a very good survival rate. I was going to have a short-ish treatment, but it was going to be very intensive chemotherapy. So they said initially it was going to be 3 months of chemotherapy every 2 weeks, and then some radiotherapy because they were all in one area. I felt pretty calm throughout the process because I'm just a fairly chill person overall, and the medical professionals would always tell me if I needed counseling, or, they wanted to talk about my emotions and make sure I wasn't bottling it up. And I'd always say, I genuinely feel calm. It almost felt like this lorry was coming towards me. I knew I should have been worried about it, but I just wasn't. And then they said, well, it might come out at the end, when it's all resolved, and that didn't happen. I was open to it, but it didn't happen. I just felt pretty calm throughout the whole thing. That being said, I absolutely hated chemo. I felt nervous about going, and just everything about it was horrible. And I was quite annoyed because at the time it was I've got to sort of put my life on pause for a time. The side effects of chemo made life a lot harder. My already disorganized brain was then hit with brain fog. I'd constantly just forget things or walk into rooms or double book things, and that was incredibly hard. And also because as well, when you've got cancer, you've often got a lot of paperwork to fill out, because I had student finance I had to deal with. I had to pause my student funding. So there was just so much paperwork, and the only way around this really was to just get help off my parents, and they'd do a lot of stuff with me for the paperwork. And as well, so I was the exec of 2 societies. One of them was Star Wars Society, and the exec there just were really helpful at dumbing things down for me, because I was still running the society while away, because I went to a local university. So they just really dumbed things down for me, pulled up a lot of the slack that was left behind, and that was just really helpful. Another horrible side effect of chemo was when I'd get various associations. So I'd associate anything on the day that I did really with chemo. So on the first day I was just gorging on Heroes to get rid of the taste in my mouth, and I had ginger beer. And now whenever I smell ginger beer, I just instantly dry heave. And it took me a while to get over Heroes. I'm still a bit hit and miss with fudge. And as well, so another one is fluids injected into me. So if I have a scan and they put saline into me, I throw up, so I have to have a bowl for that. And it's always weird when I ask the doctor for a bowl just before my injection, because it's not something they normally get, I suppose. So the way that they solved that was primarily through mental health medication, because it got to the point at the end where I'd pretty much just be throwing up the whole time at chemo. So I had diazepam, which calmed me down, because it was association, so I assume they gave me a mental health medication. But for that hour while they were waiting for the medication to set in and for my chemo to start, I'd just be super chill, because I'm already a pretty chill person. The chemo itself was horrible. Even writing this just made me a little tetchy with the sort of associations. But I just hated the whole thing, the burning bones, the needle, the constant prodding of the needles, the smells. It just felt like my soul was ill, not just my body. I really don't miss those things, but I also don't miss, I don't like the long and mid-term side effects. I always joke saying that the mid-term ones are you got 2 dice. One has a random non-essential body part on, and the other on every face just turns black and falls off on it, and that's not nice. Because of my calmness throughout the treatment, I just found bright sides in everything. Such include, I'd be able to say with absolute confidence that if I found a hair in my food, that it wasn't mine. I was able to have 7 pizzas in 5 days. I was able to go out and enjoy the smells of everything, because I had a sensitive sense of smell. So while things were disgusting to me, also things that smell nice, smell extra nice. I got to slap various meats on my scalp. And I found various ironies as well, such as how I was gifted a beard oil set on the day of my diagnosis by coincidence. Cancer also provided me with more serious opportunities. I got the chance to bond with my brother, he'd shave my scalp weekly. And when my parents, they'd help me with everything, from filling out forms, and when I wasn't feeling well from chemo. And my girlfriend, who came to visit me while on chemo on her lunch breaks, because she worked in the hospital. What I learned from cancer, it gave me plenty of opportunities to learn about life. While I think I've lived fairly well up until now, It did make me just reevaluate everything and what my priorities are. While it hasn't changed my physical lifestyle, it certainly changed what I appreciate and what I see as important and what is not important. For example, with the managers in the office, while I try and be polite and, work socially, if I botch it, I just try not to let it faze me anymore, because really it's just not that important in the grand scheme of things. And I think working out what is important and what isn't is really, just being able to get that perspective is a really, obviously wouldn't choose to have cancer, but a good benefit of having gone through that, to me personally anyway. And yeah, just enjoying the sort of the mundane things in life, even just like a dreary day or like mundane weather, and just taking a moment to appreciate just being alive. Because, I really think that unless you're undergoing serious suffering, every moment in life is really quite precious. So yeah, after 3 months of chemotherapy, my cancer was cured. However, I had to continue with treatment to lower the chances of it coming back. This is when I started radiotherapy. This wasn't so bad, it just left me feeling exhausted. The worst of it started once I finished, just a lot of pain on the skin. I still feel exhausted today. I'm working at my strength. I hope to go back to university in January. And ironically, I have an essay due on the problem of evil and suffering. And I have a very fortunate experience because while my chemotherapy was intensive and horrific, I had good odds and relatively short treatment and a low chance of it coming back. And I look forward to what the future holds.